Thank you so much, Jim. I appreciate it. And Stephen, thank you too for the invite. Jim said I have one of my colleagues with me, Marinos. He's the treasurer of the DC Police Union. Him and I basically speak for, as Jim said, 3,000 rank and file police officers. That's officers, detectives, and sergeants that work for the MPD. I think the biggest question that we hear, at least over the past 6 months, from everywhere inside the Beltway is, why is crime so high? How did it get like this? And then sort of the most important question is what do we do about it? How do we resolve that? And so I want to just very briefly try to answer those questions, because I think we do have the answer. Unfortunately, no one wants to listen to us about it, but that's another story. So when this all started, we have to go back to 2020. In June of 2020, we had this incident in Minneapolis, and the whole city sort of lights, the whole country really lights on fire with this idea of police reform. Right at that time, on June 8th of 2020, the City Council introduced a bill called the Comprehensive Policing and Justice Reform Act. It was an 84-page bill with 26 subtitles that sought to remove the rights of police officers, remove their collective bargaining rights, their disciplinary rights, change the way that they're able to stop people, change the way that they're able to pursue people on both vehicles and foot, change the way that use of force is measured in terms of how it's analyzed as to whether or not it's justifiable or not. And the list goes on and on and on. And what this bill did was it shut down all of policing in the city. We tried to make this known to the City Council. Unfortunately, in June of 2020, the City Council was not interested in listening to the police union's position on anything, and so this bill passed. And it's been in effect for almost 4 years now. And what we've seen over those 4 years is nothing but mayhem. So if you look at the crime stats just last year, we ended up with 274 homicides, the highest we've seen since 1997, which was a 35% increase from the year prior, which was another record year. We had a 60% increase in robberies, I think something like 2,600 robberies. We had almost 1,000 carjackings in the city, which was a 109% increase over the prior year, doubling of carjackings that went on in the city. Violent crime overall was up 40%. And property crimes were up 26%. So burglaries, thefts, shoplifting, stolen cars, every crime category that we had, that we measure in this city was up double digits, everything. And that's exactly where we are right now. One of the reasons why it's been exacerbated is because this bill has had such a negative impact on policing and makes it so impossible for officers to do their jobs, and exposes them to administrative, civil, and even criminal penalties for doing their job appropriately, for what we all would objectively look at and say, well, that's what officers should be doing. That's now going to expose them to discipline, termination, or even being charged by the U.S. Attorney's Office. Because of that, over the same time frame, going back to this June 2020 date, we've lost over 1,400 police officers. An agency that at the time was 3,800. Of those 1,400 people that have left, 45% of them have resigned. That is an astronomical number of police officers to just walk into the property office or HR and say, here's my gun and badge, I'm done, and walk away from the agency. And we were just talking here with Jim. A lot of those people are going to other jurisdictions that don't have these sort of onerous provisions or aren't treated so poorly by their elected officials. Others are just getting out of law enforcement because, you know, making $65,000 a year to put on ballistic armor and carry 9mm and being treated like garbage is not exactly ideal. And so we see a lot of people, particularly younger folks and younger generations, saying, well, forget this. I came here because this job means a lot to me. I had inspiration to be a police officer, but now that I realize what it is, I can go work somewhere else and make more money and maybe even work from the sanctity of my own couch. So over that same time frame, we've only hired 900 police officers after we've lost these 1,400, which means that there's a 500 person shortage of staffing in our agency. And that staffing has created, because the police department can't say, well, we don't have enough officers to respond to that. We appreciate your 911 call, sir or ma'am, but we don't have anyone to send. They're still going to send somebody. And so what the department does to make up for this gap is force people to work overtime. Now you might think officers like to work overtime, which is true to some extent, but right now we're using 1.1 million hours of overtime. That's hours, not dollars. It's actually $70 or $80 million a year that we spend on overtime. The 10-year average prior to this 2020 date that I'm sort of using as this marker was 250,000 hours, a quarter of that. So we're now using 4 times the amount of overtime hours in order to make up for that. And coincidentally, 1 million hours of overtime is equivalent to 500 full-time employees. So this shortage of police officers that we have is causing the remaining police officers to be overburdened with extra work. And so we sort of have 2 categories of people in the department: people who are actively looking for another job, or people who are here to stay but have decided that maybe it's not worth it to expose themselves to all of these penalties that exist, and they've taken a much more reserved approach to how they actually police, and whether or not they get out of the car and address certain people in certain situations is now questioned. Something that they would have done automatically in the past is now, well, I don't know if I want to take that risk anymore. So what we've been trying to do is to get the City Council and also Congress to find a way to overturn this piece of legislation that I'm talking about. It's been a real slog. It's been difficult. We actually got a disapproval resolution passed through the House and through the Senate earlier this year. I think that was in April. Unfortunately, when it made its way down to Pennsylvania Avenue, President Biden didn't see it the same way and vetoed the resolution to disapprove that bill. So the bill then was permanently finalized in the city. So, and we had just prior to that successfully got rid of what was the revised Criminal Code Act. And in all of its infinite wisdom, the City Council decided to rewrite the entire criminal code, which eliminated all minimum penalties and reduced all maximum penalties to about half of what they were before for all violent crimes, and made sure that even murderers could not be held accountable in any significant way. That measure was actually disapproved by the House and the Senate, and President Biden did sign that bill, and so thankfully the revised Criminal Code Act vanished at that point in time. So to get to the sort of third question here, and the most important one, is what do we do about this? One, there needs to be pressure put on the City Council from anywhere they possibly can. They need to undo the mistakes they made from 2020. I think what we see a lot of now is more legislation that's designed to fix the legislation that broke it, right? Which is a sort of typical government problem that I'm sure you've all seen before. But they passed this giant omnibus piece of legislation that's terrible. And then instead of repealing it to just go back to sort of status quo, they're now sort of throwing all of these different other types of legislation which either make the situation worse or just generally don't help in any significant way, right? They're trying to fix the situation with an eyedropper, and we need a fire hose. And so I think a lot of what you'll hear out of the council is, oh, well, we're working to fix it. But most of what's in these bills is really window dressing. It's not going to do anything to hire 500 cops. It's not going to do anything to get these cops back out of their car doing their job until we can actually get to a place where they feel supported by the City Council, by their elected officials and their police leaders, that they can go out and do their job. So that pressure can come from many ways. One, and we were just discussing at the table, there's a recall effort against Ward 6, Councilmember Charles Allen, who is really the champion of all of these ideas. He's the one that drafted and introduced these bills, and I think rightfully so. He should pay a price for doing that. And I think citizens are starting to see that, which is great. And frankly, I hope that effort is successful, because not only would it get rid of one of the problems on the council to fixing this, but I also think it's a shot across the bow to the rest of the City Council, the other 12 members, to say, listen, you need to come back to reality here and start resolving these problems in a real way. Otherwise, you'll be next. So I think that's one way people can get involved. The other way people can get involved is to ask Congress to help. There's another bill that we introduced through Congressman Garbarino, which is HR 5798, which seeks to repeal just a much smaller number of measures that are in that bill. And there's not so many of the third rail sort of hot button issues that were in the first bill, and so we think that's something that might be able to not only get through the House and the Senate, but also get signed by the White House. And that would go a long way to getting some of the rights back for police officers and convincing them that the city and the officials support them. But really, I think the main issue that we have here is that we can't hire the proper number of police officers. And what I'll say is, I've taken my time here to talk very specifically about policing, but I'd be remiss if I didn't sort of discuss the fact that the criminal justice system, the entire ecosystem in the District of Columbia, is broken. Policing is broken. I've obviously talked about that. Prosecutions are broken, right? We have two prosecuting agencies, the U.S. Attorney's Office and the OAG, and neither of them are really prosecuting anything in any significant or serious way. The courts, the judges who are behind the bench in these cases, even when people are being convicted, are not handing down sentences that are commensurate with what those penalties are, or the violence that exists in those offenses. And then finally, the sort of supervision agency, CSOSA, that we have, the Court Services and Supervision Agency, that handles sort of probation and parolees. That's really that's a federal agency, and that's a really very broken agency as well. That's not doing its job, sort of following up with people who have been released or who are on supervision from the courts. And so it's really going to take a holistic approach to begin fixing all of that to get to a place where people are dissuaded from committing crimes or they're removed from society because of the crimes they committed. But our position on this is that policing is really the front end of this. This is the intake aspect. We're the ones that put the handcuffs on the bad guy and get them into the system. And if we're not doing that, then everything downstream of policing doesn't really matter. And that's one of the problems we have. And just to put a number on that, over the past 10 years, the average number of arrests that the Metropolitan Police makes is about 40 to 44,000. Over the past 2 years, we've only arrested 14,000 people a year. So about a third of the people that normally end up in handcuffs and get booked is what's actually going on right now, even though crime is exponentially higher than it has been in 25 years. So that sort of puts a finer point on how the city has kind of stopped policing itself in this realm, and that's why criminals feel so emboldened, because likely they're not going to be arrested, and if they are, there's not much of a penalty waiting for them, even for serious crimes. So I think that's probably that sums it up to the best I can, but what I wanted to do is sort of open it up to questions if anybody has any, and I'm happy to try to answer them as best as I can. And nothing's off the record here, so please.
Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
John Timmons, and then we'll go right over here to Brian.
Okay, so with the 500 people, the 500 officer deficit you have, are those people out there to be hired, or are you have an equal problem in finding 500 people to hire if you could hire?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. So the mayor, who has been an advocate for the police from the beginning, I think she's up against the city council that doesn't understand the necessity of policing, but she's actually instituted a $25,000 signing bonus. So anyone who comes on the department, you immediately get a $10,000 bonus, and then upon graduating the academy, you get the additional $15,000. That has not moved the needle at all. And the reason being is because what potential candidates see in the Metropolitan Police Department is what I've just described to you, right? People who are looking for jobs in law enforcement are not looking to get into an agency that has the kind of problems that I've just talked about. So they're going to places like Northern Virginia, or they're going to places like suburban Maryland or even Pennsylvania. And they're not going to places like the District of Columbia because of these very problems that I've seen. So the candidate pool that we have is very small. And there's another problem there, and I don't mean to digress, but when your candidate pool shrinks, what employers end up doing is hiring people that they wouldn't normally have hired. And so you end up lowering the bar. And people who would normally have been washed out as unqualified are now sitting in a chair in the academy waiting to get their run and badge. So I think without solving the problems that I already mentioned, I don't think you're going to increase the size of the candidate pool. So, and just to put a final point on that, we lose about 140 officers per year net loss between the people that leave and the people that we hire. Over the past few years, we've averaged about 140 net loss. That number doesn't seem to be going anywhere to me. Every month there's a deficit on the hiring chart, which means that on a long enough timeline, this place is going to get to zero. And that's why the emergency that I've tried to communicate to anybody that will listen is that we need to do something now, because the longer we wait, the larger that gap is going to be that we have to fill.
Okay.
Brian?
Yeah.
Here's the mic.
You talked earlier about the sort of astounding double-digit or even triple-digit increases in crime and carjackings and robberies. What would you say is most concerning going into 2024? Is there a trend or an area that a specific type of crime or something that you consider to be a top priority for MPD going into 2024?
Yeah, obviously, I think that when you look at a number like 274 homicides, and again, to put that in perspective, in 2012, we had 88 homicides. So that is something like a 350% increase over that 10-year window. And the stuff that we were doing in 2012, we can replicate. We could do that with the right number of police officers, the right sort of supervision, and with support from the council to sort of undo some of the policies that took that type of policing away, we could get back there. So, you know, anything that involves loss of life, I think, is at the top of the list. But obviously, as you mentioned, 950 something carjackings is astounding. That the number is mind-boggling to think of that many people getting ripped out of their car. And you know, I don't know if you saw even just last week that someone got pulled out of their car. The car was stolen with a child in the back. This is something that happens. It's not uncommon. It is horrifying, but this is something that happens, and that is something that absolutely needs to get taken care of. And the way that that gets handled is when those people are arrested and convicted, that they're held accountable by the court system. And that's what we're not seeing, particularly when they're juveniles. I would say that next to the percentage of juveniles who actually spend time pulled out of society in some sort of detention facility is probably single digits. It is very rare to see a juvenile, even for murder cases, be held in a detention facility. And that's something that goes to Brian Schwab and his policies at the OAG. But sort of more, and I think more to your question is more from a sort of personal safety issue. Absolutely, people need to be careful, right? You need to be fully aware of your surroundings. You need to know what you're doing. You shouldn't have your headphones in. You're driving in your car. Your doors should be locked. Your windows should be up. You know, I hate to be having to say this to people, but you really do need to be aware of your surroundings and what's going on around you, and make sure that you know you have exit strategies that you can get away. Most criminals, like I've been a detective for 16 years now. I've sat across the table from a lot of bad guys and asked them, you know, why they did what they did. And for the ones that want to talk to me, what I've learned from that is that they look for people who are unassuming or not paying attention. Because that means that that person is a lot less likely to identify them, a lot less likely to fight back, a lot less likely to be able to sort of direct the police to who they are or where they went. And so when you sort of exude yourself as somebody that is aware of your surroundings and knows what's going on, you will probably not make the list of somebody who would be victimized. And so to answer your question, it's kind of a long way around. It is very important that people are aware of their surroundings and are being very careful out here until we can get the situation under control.
Okay. Jeff here, and then we'll go over here to this table.
Thank you. This is a two-part question. One's pretty quick. Who in the DC government electeds have been allies of yours and safety in the government that you've had really good conversations with, who maybe were able to support? And then two, what's your take on why we see crime in places now, violent crime especially, in neighborhoods that either had saw a deep reduction in crime in 2010s, but now we see it back, or places that haven't seen crime in a long time, Georgetown, Upper Northwest, places like that.
Yeah. So the first part of the question, I would say that Mayor Bowser, she gets a lot of flack for the crime in the city, but she has been an advocate of, she has spoken against the defund the police movement. She has openly spoken against the provisions that the council has passed. She has vetoed or not signed many of the pieces of legislation that came across her desk. And she has never once suggested that we need less police officers or that police officers should be doing less. So she has been an advocate of ours, or as close to an advocate as I can find. And I think that the more people that support her on her public safety message and see her approval rating go up while you see the city councils go down, I think that's a key aspect of the sort of dynamics within city politics. On the council, you know, some folks had mentioned Brooke Pinto. I think she really she's now the judiciary chair. She's taken over from Charles Allen, thank God. But I think she's trying to do her best to solve these problems, but she's having to tap dance around these 12 other council members that are pushing her in the other direction. So she's in a tough spot to sort of be as bold as I think that she's willing to be. So supporting her and her public safety message, I think, would go a long way. The only other council member that's out there that has been helpful to us is Vince Gregg, he introduced a bill called the Force of 4200, which sought to set a budget aside to actually get the police department to 4,200 police officers. Right now, it's at 3,300 police officers. It was when I took office in April of 2020. it was 3,900. And so he's trying to get that back up to 4,000 or above. In addition to that, that bill that I just mentioned also seeks to repeal a number of measures in the Comprehensive Policing and Justice Reform Act. So I would say Vince Gregg and Bro Pinto are really the two people on the council that seem to be level-headed. And Mayor Bowser, I think, has the right messaging on public safety. The second part of your question is that crime sort of spilling into neighborhoods that would normally have been targeted by that. And I think that all goes to what I've been saying before, is that there's really no accountability. So any criminal can go to any part of the city and have a field day. And in other neighborhoods, there's obviously a lot more targets to break into stores and steal nicer cars and break into people's homes and steal property, rob people who have more valuable things on them. And so why not? Why not go up to Tenleytown? Why not go up to Friendship Heights and find people who actually have more things that they want to steal and steal from them there? Because regardless of whether they're on Southern Avenue or Western Avenue, even if they get caught, they're not going to face any penalty. So why should I remain in my neighborhood, which is sort of impoverished and covered in blight, when I can go up to a neighborhood and find all these valuable things? It really just comes down to criminals knowing that they're not going to be held accountable regardless of where they are. I think at one point in time, if the courts and the criminal justice system saw that, they would sort of come down on people, and we don't see that anymore.
Okay.
Thank you so much for being here. This is absolutely fascinating. I have so many questions, but the one I'll ask is, your membership has to be beating their heads against the wall right now. What are you doing, and I guess this is for both of you, to keep your membership motivated? Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's an excellent question because, look, these are government employees, right? And maybe not all of them are gung-ho as the next, but the vast majority of our membership wants to go out and do police work, right? That's why they signed up for the job. They want to go catch the bad guys, and they want to book them. And nobody wants to do it in a way that's not constitutional or responsible. That type of behavior is immediately identified, and people are held accountable for that stuff. But what they ask us when we go talk to them is like, is it safe for me? Look, my bosses came here and told me we should go out in this neighborhood and execute this plan. Is it safe for me to do that? And the answer we have to give them as their employee representatives is no. You're going to be exposed to, yeah, they want you to go do that, but guess what? If a complaint comes in or you end up using force in this situation, you're now exposed to all these different things. And we can give them real examples of their coworkers who've been disciplined or fired for doing legitimate police work. And so, it's hard for us to, when you say motivate them, look, we don't want to lose any employees. We certainly try to encourage them to stick it out and buckle up. But in terms of, hey, we want to go do police work, it's sort of at your own risk, because the department and the city, and we have independent agencies, the Office of Police Complaints, the U.S. Attorney's Office investigates us, the OAG investigates us, the IG, we have EEO, we have probably 9 separate agencies that investigate cops. And I think that's one of the problems, to digress a little bit with the council, is that they're constantly sort of chasing this idea of accountability for cops. And what I always ask them is, well, can you name a police officer that engaged in some sort of misconduct and was not held accountable? And everyone just gives me a blank stare. And it's because, look, there's unfortunately, there's misconduct. It's very rare, but when it happens, officers are held accountable. They're disciplined or fired. And that's what we wanted. And then when people have that conversation, people then turn around and say, well, we don't want any misconduct at all. I agree, but that means we need to hire better people, and that's not what you're doing. You're degrading a government agency, which means it's going to get worse, and it's going to hire less qualified people, which means that the problem that you're trying to solve is actually going to increase. So you're sort of working against your own interests here. So it's kind of a long way around, but it's a very good question, because it's hard for us when we go talk to our members and they say, hey, look, this is what the department wants me to do. Is it safe to do that? And the answer a lot of times is no, it's not.
So I've been following you guys on Twitter since 2017, or you have a great Twitter account. I think that the saddest thing about this is that this was entirely predictable. I mean, you've been saying since that late, even since 2020 is when I first started noticing you talking about that, and that's the most frustrating thing I think about this. 2 questions I have for you, though, about sort of what can people do. The first is about the U.S. Attorney's Office. He serves at the pleasure of the president. Have you all thought about calling that, his lack of prosecution is a policy choice by this administration because he's still in his job? I mean, have you thought about going after the president at all, or, you know, taking it to the president and, you know, talking about that? That's the first thing. I mean, he's in that job. You know, like you said, he serves at the pleasure of the president. He's not bringing any cases, it sounds like, from what I see from the media. And then the second question is, since we're at the Republican Club, is there a political role for the, you know, the GOP to somehow, you know, bring some people into the political fight and sort of bring a crime message? You know, it's a 95% Democrat city, but is there any role, since we're at the Republican Club, for, you know, the DC GOP to sort of make, you know, make a message there or something like that?
Yeah, and so we appreciate you following us on social media. It's one way we can try to get outreach there. And just to your point, we put out a press release on June 8th of 2020 regarding that bill that I talked about, and we said, listen, if you pass this bill, you will see a historic increase in crime and an exponential exodus of police officers. And that has come to fruition beyond our wildest imaginations, right? And so we tried to warn them in every way we could, and we were roundly ignored and rejected. But the question about Matt Graves, it's a tougher one, because, you know, wading into sort of that federal political arena, you know, we're a municipal police union. It's very difficult for us to get any leverage against the federal government. All of our contracts and our statutory representational authority comes from DC code, municipal code, and from the DC Public Employee Relations Board, which gives us literally no teeth whatsoever other than to just sort of go and complain. And I think in that environment, that's not necessarily going to be very successful. And you know, we try our best to work with the U.S. Attorney's Office and sort of resolve those kind of problems. So the short answer is no, we haven't made that effort to do so. The second question that I think you asked was how can Republicans help? And the answer is there's a lot. There's a lot that can be done. Particularly, we have this bill out there now, again, H.R. 5798, seeks to restore and repeal a lot of the stuff that exists in this bill that I've been discussing today. That bill right now, I believe, is in the committee, is in the House Oversight Committee. And so if you could, whatever you could do to the people that you speak with on the Hill to get that out of there. There's actually 2 Democrat co-sponsors on that. Angie Gregg and Congressman Cuellar, who both were victims of crime right in this area here. And so they've signed on to the bill saying, look, if this is what you guys need to be able to do your job, then we're here to help you. So it is a bipartisan bill. It's introduced by Congressman Garbarino. But again, there's bipartisan support there. And so if we can get that out of committee and get it voted on, I think we'll probably have a companion bill in the Senate to go with it. And it's something that I believe the White House will have an appetite for, because it strips out some of those third rail issues like I talked about use of force and neck restraints. It doesn't sort of address those that are more concerning from a political standpoint. So that's the answer there.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead. And then,
I guess my question is, you know, right, in theory, politicians respond to their constituents and pressure and who they're hearing from. You know, in your opinion, I have to imagine that the council members that you talked about who aren't necessarily on the right side of this issue are hearing from people about the crime. Is it that those voices aren't as loud as the other voices that they're hearing on the other side of this issue? But I guess my real question is, are there other voices that are still saying, you know, allowing you to have these authorities back is a bad thing? It just seems like an interesting dynamic there that you have so many that seem like they're opposed to these types of things. And I guess the other question is, oftentimes in Washington, right, you could have larger power brokers that might be able to influence things. So are there sort of larger powers other than constituents who are weighing in or putting their thumb on this issue that might lead these council members to be taking the positions that they are?
So the first question is, I think the way that you framed it is correct. There's a very small sliver of the populace that is still sort of advocating this defund the police, strip police officers of rights, we don't need cops issue, you know, let's get violence interrupters and community programs, that's how you solve crime. What I see, and this will just be anecdotal from sort of my perspective, that is a very, very quieted aspect of the debate. I don't see that nearly as broadly as we did certainly 4 years ago, but even 6 months ago, it seems like it's dwindled down to nothing. But when you talk to council members, they point to that as one of the reasons why they can't be bold on this issue. So I don't know if that's part of the sort of, with the shield that they're hiding behind to do the things they're doing, or if they genuinely believe that these sort of activist groups are going to be able to sort of pressure them or impact them in some way. Because it seems to me that broadly, if you have a ward, if you're a council member of a ward and you're dealing with a 300% homicide increase in your ward, and the vast majority of your citizens are outraged, that you would just address that and you would tell anybody that said anything else, sorry, what you suggested didn't work. You know, we kowtowed and abdicated to every whimsical fantasy that you ever had, and we put it into every bill we could and passed it unanimously, and we're left with a giant mess. So unfortunately, you have to take a walk while we fix this. But I don't see anybody that sort of has the intestinal fortitude or the gravitas to do that. The second question you asked is sort of, are there larger power brokers that have their fingers on the scale? In terms of supporting it, I don't know. I think that's hard for me to sort of analyze. I think what I would say is that there could be power brokers that I think could convince them to come off of these ideas because of the fact that when these issues go through Congress, we saw this with the RCCA, we saw this with the police reform bill, one of which was successful, one of which failed. Republicans put Democrats in a very difficult spot, which was either to be reasonable about public safety and crime or to be labeled as defunders. And those Democrats who were facing re-election, particularly in purple states, got very spooked by that and ended up coming to the table to support the bill, which is why they both passed the House and the Senate. And what I would say is if I was a Democrat in the DNC or some sort of power broker, as you mentioned, I would tell the city council, you need to stop this crap, because every time these guys come up to the Hill, all of our people find themselves in a very difficult spot. Because now they have to answer to their constituents back in their home state as to whether or not they support the police, because here's this bill that they have to weigh in yes or no on. They have to vote yes or no. And so, but we haven't, look, I'm not privy to those conversations, but I'm not aware that any of that has gone on. But I think that's something that I was kind of expecting to happen, and I don't believe it did. Thank you for that.
Okay, Colleen, real quick.
Okay, two things. One, what was the name of the June bill, law that's now law?
The Comprehensive Policing and Justice Reform Act.
Okay. So I think Alan is going to be at the Hill Center on the 30th talking about this. I'm going to go if anyone else. My question is a data question. So my husband got hijacked at gunpoint in front of his house in Capitol Hill. Right around the corner, same thing. Daylight, 11 o'clock in the morning. And I keep hearing about a lot of men. And I'm just wondering if the data shows anything between men and women with carjackings and muggings. Like it's more men than women. And then the second thing is if there's any data that what happens when people resist. I know you're not supposed to resist. You're supposed to just give me your keys, whatever. I would like to know what the data is, though, for people that do resist.
So the first part of your question is about the
Men and
gender
women.
of suspects?
Men and women data, yeah.
I would say that the lion's share of crime is committed by men.
Not by.
The victims?
The victims.
I don't know how to quantify that. I'm not sure we track that. The Metropolitan Police Department might track that.
Okay, because I do hear mostly about men getting, and, you know, yeah, that's my one question.
I don't have that. I can
Okay.
try to find that.
I think that'd be really interesting, because I think having no data, I can tell you that, you know, my husband was just gonna hand the keys.
Yeah. So that's the second part of your question.
And I wonder if they
is
know,
about
I just
people
wonder there's some
fighting back.
generalities that men and women don't. I mean, I fantasize about what I would do if I was. I mean, I've got all kinds of plans.
Sure, yeah.
So I know what the advice is, but I would also like to know what is the data show when
Okay.
people resist. in all kinds of clever
I
ways.
definitely don't have the answer to either of those about the
Okay.
sort of gender of victims or the sort of results about how victims have resisted.
Yeah.
What I would say is you're generally dealing with a teenager who has no idea how to handle a firearm. And if you're
Yeah.
going to get into a wrestling match with them,
Yeah.
there's just really no predicting how that situation is going to shake out.
Yeah.
And that's why I think the message from policing, which I agree with, is like just give them the car and call the police, and hopefully we can catch them and do what we need to do. But it's easy to say this is what I would have done, but you have to remember these are children who have already decided to do something stupid. And if they find themselves in a situation where they're losing a battle, they're going to react poorly. They fight police all the time, so I'm sure they're not going to have a problem fighting citizens.
Right, like you were talking, we don't have that as a union, which the police department does, but just put in context, we had a female FBI agent, she was off duty, she was going to her FBI car in Capitol Hill,
Yeah.
and she was carjacked, and, you know, I don't think there's any way, like, we talked to the detectives, lieutenant who ran that case, there's no way, unless you're constantly on 24 hours to defend yourself, so.
I mean,
I
but
don't know
even
this
if you, I'm just curious, like, even if you just like threw your keys, are they gonna shoot you?
Maybe,
These are the questions I'd like to
maybe.
answer.
I can't say no. Let me tell you that. I can't say that they wouldn't. You could upset them, and obviously they're not people that make wise decisions based on the fact that they're pointing a gun in your face. So that's a tougher one to answer.
Just curious.
Shelley, you get the last question.
Oh golly, well, I'm gonna have to put a whole bunch into this. Now, I'm curious, going back to the bill that passed that basically is 5-year-olds' hands. Maybe it's because I'm a literalist, but I'm curious as to what it is that, I understand it might be, use of excessive force and neck holds and all that kind of thing, but what is it that is preventing a policeman from leaving their car and addressing a crime that's happening? For instance, all the time, I mean, all the phones, I'm sure, are always going off with alerts, but that, the Chick-fil-A is in the process of being robbed up on Wisconsin. And they're there, and they see it happen. Do they not get out of their car when these robberies are occurring? And, then you've got the carjackings and all of that, and the kid getting away with braces on a bike, from shooting somebody at Thomas Circle. What is it that's making police feel like they can't do anything anymore because of this law?
No, I think that's a great question, and I'll try to answer it as succinctly as possible because it is a long answer. But what I would say is if police officers are hearing that a store is being robbed or a bank is being robbed, it's a robbery, they're going to respond to that. I think where we start to have problems is on reasonable suspicion, right? The way the law works is that an officer can stop someone and investigate someone if they have reasonable articulable suspicion that crime is afoot, right? If you think someone is doing something suspicious and you can articulate that, you can stop them and ask them what's going on. That's really the bread and butter of police work, is stopping people and figuring out who they are and what they're up to. That's the kind of thing that's going to make people stop committing crimes, at least in that area where officers have identified now. The bill creates an environment where they have to basically create 4 or 5 page reports every time they do that. And it also creates this sort of pipeline through the Office of Police Complaints for those people who were stopped to then go complain on the officer. When the Office of Police Complaints generates an investigation, that officer is now prohibited from testifying in court in any other trial, which means that those cases are going to get dismissed and they're now labeled as someone who's like not a legitimate police officer.
And do these criminals actually lodge complaints?
Yeah, all the time.
Oh, do they?
Yeah, all the time. It's the Office of Police Complaints is very busy and they're very unfriendly to police officers. They're not staffed by objective people. They're staffed by activists who hate cops. But to go on a little bit further, because you mentioned the use of force stuff, right? One of the things that this bill does is, so neck restraints and chokeholds have been banned in the city for police officers to use since 1986. So for almost 40 years, it's been prohibited for an officer, and the way it's defined is that you can't block airflow to the lungs or blood to the brain by placing someone in sort of what we would all know as like a headlock, right? And that's been prohibited. No one objects to that. The union and the police administration has never objected to that. It's been in place forever. What this bill did was it made incidental contact with a subject's neck also an unjustified use of force neck restraint. So if you even just accidentally brush up against the suspect's neck while you're in some sort of tussle with them, that's going to be an immediate 30-day suspension. And not only that, you're now going to have an unjustified use of force neck restraint on your record, which also means you can't testify anymore. It also means that you won't be able to apply for specialized units within the department. And it also means that likely people could go and complain or file a civil suit against you for doing that, because now they have the paperwork that says you did it, even though you're tussling on the ground with a guy with a knife and you just happen to brush against his neck. So knowing that, do you really want to get out of the car and stop the guy? Even if he's polite, right? That's what you're hoping, but what if he's not? And what if he decides he wants to fight you? Now you have all of this weight of this sort of, even if I do my job appropriately, I'm exposed to all of these penalties. And it has a chilling effect. So even police officers that I would say are very proactive, gung-ho officers that go out and do their job every day are now second-guessing themselves because they have to pay their mortgage, they have to feed their kids, and doing a 30-day suspension and then having your career derailed is not ideal. And so do I need to go stop that guy in the alley and ask him why he's peeking in people's garages, or do I need to just keep driving down the street? Right? And that's not a situation we should put our officers in, because they want to go in the alley and say, what the hell are you doing back here? I need to talk to you, and investigate that and maybe close cases on that. And that's how, as a detective, that's how we close cases. Hey, detective, I stopped this guy in the alley. I heard you had a bunch of burglaries back there. Well, guess what? His fingerprints match all this stuff, and now he's arrested. But we're not doing that. And I could go on and on about the way that they've reframed use of force and they've reframed stops and pursuits, and it has created an environment where it is impossible to do your job and it appropriately and not be exposed to these penalties. So officers are sort of saying, it doesn't make sense for me to do this sort of proactive work. So, you mentioned like robberies. You get a call for robbery in progress. We're going to that. We're going to go to that, and we're going to do our job. But the stuff that we do in between, pulling over cars with fake tags, pulling over cars that have broken headlights, pulling over cars that are suspicious, right? That might be something that sort of goes by the wayside because of the way the system is set up to sort of attack and harangue police officers. I wish I had better news to end on. The good news is there is a way to fix this. I think if people get loud about it, obviously people in the room are upset at what's going on, as I'm sure you understand we are too. We want to go out and solve these problems. We don't want to be police officers in a city that has a crime problem. We want to get these guys in jail. We want to get these numbers down. I think if everybody starts sort of rowing in the same direction, we can get some of these things fixed. And so that's sort of the positive note I'll try to end on.
Great, and I'm going to just add to yours a little bit. With the DC Police Union, is there anything any of us in the corporate community could do to help the DC Police Union?
Sure, so we have a website, enoughisenoughDC.com. You could sign up to get, first of all, it'll give a lot more information about what I've talked about today and sort of who you can direct your complaints to. It'll allow you to sort of sign up for our emails, and we can get information out to you that way. Also our website, dcpoliceunion.com, that's another place where we have a lot of information about what's going on. Or you can just reach out to us. You can send us an email. If you just send an email to dcpoliceunion@dcpoliceunion.com, myself and my partner here will get those emails. My email is gpemberton@dcpoliceunion, and we're happy to answer your questions. And just like it's a pleasure to be here today for all of you. And if there's any other events or any other groups that you think we can speak to help spread this message, we can.
Within the union, is there any philanthropic aspect in it that folks could?
So not right at this moment, no, but I certainly can get back to you from a financial standpoint on that issue.
Okay. Well, Gregg, you've given us so much to think about. You've been I'm overwhelmed with all of these statistics, and you're exactly right. It touches each and every one of us. I mean, I had a very good friend who left the Nats game. It was 11:15 by the time he got out of the garage, went over to Suitland Parkway, got hit by 4 guys in a car, and what's the first thing he did was call 911, and they said, don't get out of the car, roll your window down, put up your phone, and bingo, he turned around and they were gone. And I thought, isn't that interesting? But they all know what was going on with that. And for you and the union to help folks think, what do you do? Do not resist, do not. And he wasn't going to resist, but he didn't know what else to do. And they just said, stay where you are, roll up your window, or after you show him your phone, and don't do anything. And we're sending a police car right now. And they knew exactly what was going on. And so it's those sort of things. And those little things that you can help the community with as to what to do, because your mind is racing when that happens.
Right.
So, but with that, Greg, thank you.
Well, Jim and Stephen, thank you both so much. I appreciate it. It was a pleasure being here. Hope you all have a good day.
You bet. Thank you.